Coming up, what's life really like at the coalface of politics? And what drives someone to run as a candidate? Keep listening for a one-on-one chat with former member for Blair Cameron Thompson. It's an honest discussion that reveals the highs and lows of being a local member in federal parliament. It's Thursday, February 11, 2021, and I'm Alan Roebuck. Welcome to Ipswich Today, which acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land on which it is produced and pays respects to elders past, present and emerging. This podcast is supported by Kinetics, people-powered web hosting trusted by Australian businesses since 1999. Life before, during and after politics. Not many people get to experience all three firsthand. What's it really like being a politician? Ipswich local Cameron Thompson was elected to the House of Representatives in 1998 and served until 2007. He was a radio journalist before turning to politics for the Liberal Party. Cameron, thank you for joining Ipswich Today.
Yeah, no worries, Alan. Nice to be here.
Can we start at the very beginning? You were born in Rockhampton. Is that where you grew up and went to school?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good place to grow up, and in many ways, I think it reflects a similar kind of outlook to Ipswich, and a good place. A lot of diverse kind of industries and things, and I think my background from Rocky fitted me well for my future in the things that I did. Yeah.
Did you have any thoughts of entering politics while you were still at school, or say in your early 20s?
Not at school. As soon as I got involved in journalism, I did a cadetship as a journalist with the Gladstone Observer, and then worked for the Rockhampton Morning Bulletin. And of course, that brought me into contact with local politics, and you started to get a sense straight away of the tremendous ability that politicians have to make a difference, and that's a tremendous honour to have that kind of thing put before you. And straight away you start thinking as a journalist, well, gee, this problem needs to be solved. I've got to get this problem solved. And you run around as a journalist trying to get it done. But of course, the people you need to go to are the politicians. And so you start thinking, well, you know, why should I bang on their door if I could just do it myself? Things would only be fantastic.
Well, as those thoughts were evolving, what other influences helped shape your views and where you were going with politics?
I went on from working at the Rocky Bully and the Gladstone Observer. I then went to the ABC, and the ABC took me out to, I was in Brisbane, I was in Mackay with the ABC, in Brisbane with the ABC, and then I went out to Longreach. And one thing that I encountered out there was like the harsh reality of the rural side of Australia, where, you know, if you're someone in agriculture, the buck stops with you in every respect. And I found some really challenging and tough kind of times, which as a journalist, particularly as a sort of a journalist in a city, you know, working in an urban environment, you sort of think, oh, well, you know, you just get onto the government and everything gets fixed. Well, in a place like that, it doesn't happen. And I started to sort of see that, well, you know, people do need to be a lot more resilient. They need to be able to stand on their own 2 feet. They can't just turn to the government every time something goes wrong. And really what we need in a lot of these cases is for the government to get out of its way. Now, that marked a little bit of a change in my philosophies, because up till then, being a journalist, you know, your background as a journalist is you tend to gravitate towards causes, and inevitably they tend to be of the left. And I started to see a little bit of an alternative view of the world, and I suppose, you know, I sort of then, from then on, my politics sort of moved more to the right, you know, at least to the centre.
Yes.
That's where I think things need to get done. So anyway, and I went on from there to the Northern Territory and worked up there for the ABC in Darwin, and then I started working for the Education Minister, who was then Tom Harris. Moved on from him to work for Shane Stone, and at that point Shane was the Minister for Everything for a period, and so I was, you know, working as a media advisor and also a policy advisor in all kinds of fields, everything from Attorney General to minerals and energy and industries and development. And it was just an incredible landscape that of possibilities that opens up, when you can see the potential of a place like that, remote as it is. And the possibilities of doing something. So I suppose that's a roundabout and very long way of saying that, it was an awakening for me across all those years about, the tremendous potential of Australia and the tremendous potential of the regions in Australia to get something done, and then the ability of people with power in politics to be able to make differences and to be able to have input into those things.
So you certainly covered some kilometres between Queensland and the NT. When and how did you end up in Ipswich?
I wound up in Ipswich it was about 1997. I'd been working for Joan Sheldon. I'd come down from the Northern Territory to work for Joan when she was. She was, of course, the leader of the Liberal Party as it was then. We didn't have a combined conservative side of politics. We only had the Liberals and the Nationals in those days. And I came down to work for Joan, who was the leader of the Liberal Party, the junior coalition partner. And I'd been working for her for a while. And, we were looking for a place to put down our roots. And we'd had a place in Brisbane, and it wasn't so good. I didn't like it there. Maybe it's the Rocky boy coming out in me. I found myself in Ipswich, and that was the place that I put down the roots. Yeah.
Fair enough. Well, the seat of Blair was created in 1998, and part of that was the seat of Oxley with the boundaries being redrawn. You were elected before social media. So for that campaign in 1998, can you just give us a little bit of an insight into the main elements of your campaign? And I'm thinking straight up, there was a lot of door knocking.
Oh, Alan, 1998, in the seat of Blair, there was only one issue: Pauline Hanson, One Nation. That was the Pauline Hanson had been the member for Oxley. She'd been elected because she'd been a Liberal and got chucked out of the party after the nominations had closed. And so she had no opponents from right, and she collected all the protest votes from the left. And so she'd been elected in 1996 to the seat of Oxley. Oxley got divided in two then, and the most prospective thing for her was clearly to run in Blair, which included much more of the rural area than Oxley, which was tended to be more obvious Labor country in heading towards Brisbane. And she thought she had that on a plate, and I defeated her.
Apart from the anti-Hanson sentiment that must have been floating around, what else did you do in your campaign to raise your profile?
Well, it didn't take much, let me tell you, Alan, because guns. We'd had the Port Arthur massacre.
Of course.
And in the wake of that, John Howard had made the very courageous decisions he'd made. And, I was going around all the local shows. I'd set up a card table, sit there and talk to everyone from daylight till after dusk, every day of those shows. And, of course, a big issue there was, guns. And I found, much as it was sort of touted that, people in that country area were upset that they'd had the guns taken off them, I generally found if there was a man and a woman, they'd come up to me and they'd say, the bloke would say, "I'm not happy with you, you're taking our guns away." And I'd talk to him for a while about all of that and the very valid reasons why the government was taking the decision that it was doing. And then I'd say to the lady, "And what do you think, ma'am?" And she'd say, "Oh, I think it's a good thing." Invariably, there was a very, I think it wasn't just, that's oversimplifying it, Alan, but that was a very big issue. And I found, though, that instead of just, one of the big temptations in politics is always to agree with the last person you spoke to, I just found I didn't have to do that because people from both sides could see the burning problem which had manifested itself in that Port Arthur, that horror at Port Arthur. And you could easily, you could put your case and people would give it a good solid hearing. So anyway, look, that was a very strong issue. But of course with Hanson, and the incredible hysteria and everything that was surrounding her at the moment, at that time. I mean, someone made a rap song about her.
Yes, that's right.
And
yes,
it was Pauline Pants Down. That's
Yes,
right. And they had all this. It was just wall to wall obsession with Hansonism from the start, and so often. Community organisations and things would invite her to come around and speak, and of course they'd always invite her opponents. And I would go along there, and I found those to be very engaging things, and people weren't so silly as to simply adopt or just listen to the kind of popularistic kind of mouthings that tended to come from Hanson and that side of things at that time. They would, give you a fair hearing, and I think I won more points than I lost in those occasions, and so we did all that sort of thing. We also, I remember I worked for a whole day in the pub at.
Sounds like a tough job.
Yeah, in the pub up the road, in a pub north of Esk.
Right.
And I sat there in the bar all day, and people came because the public had sort of said to me. I went in there, and the public had said, you should hear the things I hear in here. I said, okay, right, I'll sit here. I'll hear everything what people have to say.
Yep.
Well,
you did
it was an interesting time, an interesting way of doing things.
Well, history shows that you won in 1998, and in your first speech in Parliament, you were given the great honour to reply to the Governor-General's speech. How did that come about for a first-term MP?
Politics always comes down to numbers, Alan. There were many new Labor MPs elected in 1998. There were very few Liberal MPs elected new in 1998. There was me, there was Ian McFarlane, and there was Julie Bishop. There was, I think, Mal Washer. I think he was also in 1998. But there were very few people from the Liberal side of politics who were elected. And so the choice for the government as to who was going to respond, because, of course, it always comes down to a government MP to respond to the governor, because the government has that choice to make that response. And they chose me. I think it was because I'd rushed in and got my speech already. And I was banging on their door saying, hey, I'm ready to go in my first speech.
Yeah, squeaky wheel theory. That's good. That's good. Look, in that same speech, you also acknowledged receiving support during your campaign from both sides of politics, from the late Bill Gunn and Billy Hayden. Do you think that support helped you get over the line, apart from the anti-Hanson sentiment?
It was a part of the same thing. I mean, the reason why they were getting behind me so strongly was because of concern about Hansonism at that time.
Right.
And it wasn't the only thing. Of course, it was my sheer brilliance and wonderful candidacy, Alan.
Yes, of course.
But there was a real horror at the idea of some of the Hanson platform, and that was sort of shaking its way through the system. And so, like I said, I had Bill Hayden, I had Bill Gunn, I had people who'd been sworn enemies. Jeff Kennett flew up here and did a breakfast for me.
Wow. I'd forgotten about that too. Yeah. Yep. In the speech, you said you intended to work closely with all the local councils in Blair. Was that a fruitful relationship?
It had varying degrees of success, as you may well know, Alan. I did work to the best of my ability with the whole lot of them. It sort of, I don't know, maybe politics or something gave it an edge in some cases and maybe not in others. But I found that, the kind of issues that surfaced in those local councils are a real melting pot, a sort of a distillation of everybody's local views. And so working with them is a great way to get ahead. And, if you want to put in a submission or you want to get something done, it helps if everyone's singing off the same hymn sheet. It really, really does. It puts everything very clear, and it helps that every time, if you're lobbying a federal minister for something, it helps if when they come to town, the council tells them exactly the same thing that you're telling them.
Yeah, everyone. Yes, I know what you're saying. You covered many subjects in that speech, and one that stood out in my mind was a warning to Parliament to rebuild faith in Australia and democratic government. Now, fast forward to 2021, The same task, only much greater, faces the USA. How do you think we're doing in Australia?
That is just such a difficult question now, because the whole question of social media has come into it, Alan. It was a very simple kind of environment back in the day where we had these days we'd call it the mainstream media, who were the gatekeepers to all media, and they tended to set the agenda on everything that was going. And so you always had to be conscious of what was happening in the paper or on the TV, and you needed to tailor your own thoughts and directions and the way you couched your arguments to fit with the sorts of things that were going on there. Now, of course, we've got social media, and everybody is a publisher. Everyone has the capacity to get their view out there, and so the whole range of things is manifesting itself. Now, what one of the things that concerns me about it is, unfortunately, when you open your Facebook page, the things that tend to be more outrageous are the things that tend to draw your eye, and so there tends to be a natural ability on the right of politics and on the left to polarise, so that people who are slightly right tend to get drawn off to the right by the strong arguments that the more outrageous people over on the right are saying, because they've got sort of the purity of their arguments out there on the right, and similarly on the left.
Yes.
So it's drawing people away from the middle ground, and that, I think, is the current fear. That wasn't so much of an issue then, but back in the day, there really was, I think, a more, we were more aware of the need to work together, as demonstrated, for example, by what I had to say about the need to work with councils.
Yes.
And so there was this feeling that you needed to meet in the middle and do something. Meet in the middle and do something. That was the way to get things done, because we recognised that, there's no government that's ever been formed without really having control of the centre. You need to have the ability to reflect the mainstream of Australia, not out on some
not the mainstream,
left wing or
not the extremes.
Not the extremes, that's right. And in those days, so the system used to draw the people from the extremes in towards the middle to meet. Now it seems to be going the other way. And I think people are only just starting to come to grips with that now and start to understand more of that and be a lot less naive in the way they react.
I think you've nailed it, Cameron. A lot less naive about what they see and hear on social media. Moving on to another angle of discussion about politics in general, the often cited public perception is that politicians are lazy or on a gravy train. Now, from people I've known from all sides over several decades, I'd say that's clearly not true. But how tough is it in public office?
One of the first people who sort of gave me some pointers about this was Vince Lester. Vince Lester, who was the member for Keppel, and he was anyway. Joanne Miller was once his electorate secretary.
Wow. No, I didn't know that.
So that's just something to put into your pipe and smoke.
Yeah.
Actually, so Vince Lester said to me, politics is a marathon, not a sprint. If you try to sprint everywhere, you will knock yourself out, and it won't get you anywhere. You've got to treat everything as a long-term thing, and you've got to give yourself time to basically, he was just saying, don't go to every dogfight. Don't go to everything that moves. Don't be at the opening of every envelope. Don't travel thousands of miles up and down every week just so you can try and be in touch with every single meeting that's occurring. So what did I do? I did exactly the opposite and tried to attend every single meeting. And I think every politician thinks, well, I've got to be better than everybody else.
Yep.
Because I owe it to people. I've been elected. I've been given this tremendous honour, and honestly, they do, with some exceptions, I suppose. But
there
generally, people
always
go
exceptions.
Yeah.
You're about to say people go in well intentioned.
They do. They all go in for good reasons. And I know in my case, I really had this idea that we could achieve a lot more. There could be a lot more done. And off I went, and I set out to do it. And I really, so you become your own taskmaster. And honestly, there's many people in politics who are just working way too many hours. And let's not, the people who try to equate being a politician with being a job, it's just wrong. That's not right. We choose politicians to represent us in decision-making at the highest levels in our country. We also choose politicians to represent us at the highest level in our local area, on the council or at the state level. But
Yes.
but it's not a job. It is where you've been called, you've been designated, you've been given that obligation and that responsibility. And so the most important thing you've got to be able to do is explain yourself to people. If you're choosing to go down a particular path, some people may not agree with you, some people may do. So you'll get all kinds of varying mail from out of your own electorate. I mean, the whole electorate is not unified on things. They'll come at you from a whole lot of different angles. The main thing is you've got to account for yourself and why you're doing particular things. But I just think that, and of course the ones who aren't satisfied often can never be satisfied, and they will, blackguard you mercilessly.
Yes.
No matter how hard you try.
Coming with the territory, especially being in federal parliament, there's a lot of travel, and travel might seem glamorous if you don't do it a lot, but I know the shine wears off very quickly. And all that travel and being away, it must take a toll on your family, Cameron.
Oh, it is. It is difficult, Alan. It is, going off to Canberra for a couple of weeks at a time, and leaving my wife and the young family. Kids still have to go to school. It's tremendously demanding for them, and it's also, so my wife winds up down the supermarket, and next minute somebody who knows that she's my wife starts attacking her about some political issue she knows nothing about. It could be, it's just terrible for those people, because it's not like they can sort of say, oh yeah, I'll change it for you.
Yes, I've heard of those stories elsewhere. Yes, some people just don't think before they speak. Well,
I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was very demanding, and look, I was fortunate enough to go and see some parts of the world. I went off to Iraq during the Iraq conflict, and that gives you a good understanding of issues in places like that. I went to Central Europe, where they were still you wouldn't say emerging, but still developing on from the shadow of communism, those sorts of things.
Yes.
In places like Croatia and Czech Republic and those sorts of places, and we Poland, and we went to those, and we were looking at trade and all those sorts of things, and you get a good understanding about what makes those countries tick, and you can see things that reflect on your own country. Do you know, Alan, look, I mean, I used to think we had a terrible road toll in Australia. I used to think it was terrible, and we'd hear it all on the radio all the time. We've got a terrible road toll, it's bad. And I used to sing that song and go along with it, until I went to Poland, which had the same sort of population as Australia at that time. But their road network was the most shocking disaster you've ever seen. And their road toll was about 15 times ours.
Unbelievable.
And I'm thinking, I really need to get out more, because, it's bad. Any life lost is bad. But over there, they had massive divided highways built to relocate tanks in the age of communism. They had to move tanks backwards and forwards across Central Europe, and these roads, these big divided highways, were made totally for that. But they had no exits or entrances.
Oh my goodness!
And so you had, when we were over there, we were driving along in the little microbus sort of thing, and here's this B-double doing a U-turn across 4 lanes of traffic.
Now, you were fortunate to be on the government side during your 3 terms. What were your priorities for the electorate, and what were your proudest achievements?
It's just such a long list of things. And one of the difficulties with the seat of Blair, it transformed itself so much over that time. In the 3 terms that I served, we had boundary changes every time. And when I first was elected, Joe Bjelke-Petersen was one of my constituents because the electorate went right the way north of Kingaroy. Mm-hmm. By the time I left, it was basically it was simply a bit of the Brisbane Valley and Ipswich itself, and that was about all. Now, so there was a big change over that period, and so for example, there were priorities like, particularly in the early days, we built a whole complete abattoir basically at Kingaroy, the Swickers Abattoir up there, and it expanded it to do. It was a little local thing, and we expanded it to do export pork shipments, and that was a huge job opportunity, job generator locally up there. That was a huge thing, and we spent a lot of time as a federal government in those days with unemployment had been very high, and we were getting it down, and that was one of the sorts of things we did. But there was a range of things, wastewater, the opportunity, when Peter Beattie started talking about taking wastewater and shipping it out, obviously we had to get that into the Lockyer Valley, which is the food bowl for a lot of Asia, really.
Yes, exactly.
Queensland, it's a huge generator of fresh produce, and if we could get that water there, of course, it's a big thing. So we were onto that, and we were working very hard on all of that. In the middle of all that, the Ipswich motorway emerged, and, I took a very strong stance that we shouldn't be building the road while we're driving on it. So I took a different view to everybody else and decided we needed two roads, not one, and pursued that and got the full support of the Howard government for that. So there were a lot of those sorts of local things. There's Amberley Air Force Base, and, changing it from what was really just a kind of a secondary, it wasn't secondary, but it was it was just a base for the F-111s purely. Well, it's become a kind of a massive hub, not just for Air Force, but for all defence.
Army and logistics. You could legitimately call it a super base on Australian terms.
Yes. Mm. That's right. And, that emerged over that period, and getting that done. I mean, one of the things I think is a disappointment is, these days when they talk about aerospace, they make out that the hub for aerospace is Brisbane. Well, they've actually taken away from Ipswich. They've subtracted from Ipswich in relation to that, and I'm very disappointed in that. We should be having much more defence-related, aerospace technology. I mean, there's a lot going on there. Believe you me, there's a lot of secret squirrel stuff going on out there. But there could be so much more, and it would make, in my view, a lot more sense to be doing that out at Amberley.
You rode out of Blair on the Kevin 07 wave. It can't be easy waking up the next day after a defeat. What was facing you at the time, and what were you thinking?
Well, it was just gutting. Alan was just totally gutting. It was the worst, just the worst possible outcome, because we'd won the whole argument. That motorway argument was just so torrid, and we'd assembled $4 billion of funding to deliver a whole new motorway, all this sort of stuff that was going to be, it would have enabled B triples to go all the way to the port of Brisbane. So all the unloading and loading that goes on just west of Toowoomba would not have needed to have happened if we'd completed that Goodna bypass. But that completely separate to the whole idea of separating truck transport on one highway from local commuters on the other.
Once you dusted yourself off, where did your career take you then?
I had spent quite a lot of time working as an advisor for people in politics. I'd been chief of staff or principal private secretary to Joan Sheldon when she was the treasurer, and wrote all the budget speeches and things in that time. And had a lot to do with, for example, when we privatised Suncorp Metway, created Suncorp Metway.
Yeah.
That was an incredible achievement of the Borbidge government. So I had that in my in my background, and I really, one of the things that was burning me at the time that that I was unceremoniously evicted from the seat of Blair was the need to do something about amalgamating the two Conservative parties in Queensland. I'd gone out on a limb. I'd been fighting with John Howard and other people in Canberra about the need to do that, because although the coalition's a very successful thing federally, it just could not work at the state level when you had the Liberal Party as the junior coalition partner. It just couldn't work. And the Labor Party knew that, and that was why they'd introduced a system of voting called optional preferential voting, which basically meant that you could have put in brackets after that, the Liberal and National parties will never win, right? Because it just couldn't. And the only way we could hope to put ourselves on an even footing with the Labor Party was to amalgamate. And so I went into a huge, I even stood as the president of the Liberal Party for a while to get that point across. But of course, one of the big allies, or probably one of the people I was seeking to ally with, was Lawrence Springborg. So I had tremendous respect for Lawrence, who'd seen this all the way along, who was the person most in the vanguard of the battle to amalgamate the two parties. And so I went to work for him as a policy advisor. And in the lead up to the 2009 election, it was my job to assemble all the policies of the LNP and to put them into and to do all the costings and all that sort of thing. So that was a huge job.
Big job.
I just went on from there to work when Lawrence later, I worked for the Queensland Country Life as a journalist after that. After we'd been defeated in 2009, I went off to work for the Queensland Country Life. Then I came back and worked for Lawrence when he was the health minister. And that was a tremendous privilege and a very interesting time, very challenging, but I'm still very, very proud of the achievements that Lawrence made in relation to restoring some of the capacity of the health system after that terrible health payroll debacle.
Well, that's a whole subject for another day. Cameron, you've chosen to remain an Ipswich resident, which is a wonderful thing. So the city is well and truly your home now. So what's taking up your time these days?
Well, Alan, I'm basically retired. I'm a journalist, right, and a political person who does media and policy advice for politicians. I'm getting on in the tooth these days. I've hit the 60 mark. I mean, that's not a very old age, but I have.
It is when you're applying for a job.
That's precisely right. And and at the same time, journalism has been totally gutted and torn apart.
It has
by the impact of social media and all of the places where I'd worked. The Rockhampton Morning Bulletin, it doesn't exist anymore. The Gladstone Observer doesn't exist anymore. The Queensland Times, well, they sort of do in a sort of way. They exist
online, yes.
Yeah, online they do. But so the majority of those jobs and those places is tremendous. Employment opportunities for journalists is gone, and those that remain, those papers and news organisations that remain, are struggling to survive, and so they just can't employ people, and so jobs have been going backwards. And I feel very sorry for anyone out there who's a journalist, particularly if you're getting older. It's a tough world, and anyway. So what I've been doing is just basically being retired. I've been doing a lot of 3D printing, Alan. I find that's
getting into the technology. That's good to hear.
Interesting and challenging field, and huge potential of that. I've been doing a lot of that. I've also, I've taken a part-time job pumping gas. So, work at a garage on the night shift and stack the shelves. Why not? It's a good opportunity to talk to people.
Keeps you busy, that's right. Cameron Thompson, that's been a fascinating snapshot of your life from school days through the politics up until now. So I really appreciate you talking with Ipswich today.
Thank you very much, Alan. All the best to you and to your podcast. I hope it goes really, really well. Thank you.
Ipswich Today is supported by Kinetics, people-powered web hosting trusted by Australian businesses since 1999. This podcast is also listener supported. Please make a once-only gift or regular donation to help keep it online. Just go to ipswichtoday.com.au and click the donate button at the bottom of the page. You can subscribe for free and share this podcast from your favourite app, including iHeartRadio, or play Ipswich Today from your smart speaker. Music is supplied by Purple Planet Music. This is Alan Roebuck. Thanks for listening.